So good evening. We're going to go around the country to hear how curlews have done this year. And if you remember, we need about an extra 10,000 curlew chicks a year. And that's where all these wonderful people come in. So we're going to start in the north of the country and come down the east coast, along the south coast, up the west coast, and finish off in Northern Ireland. And everybody's got 5 minutes, and I'm not going to impinge upon their time by chatting for any longer. So without further ado, can we talk to Bruce Cooper, represents Working for Waders in Scotland?
Hi there, everybody. So my name's Bruce Cooper. As Graham said, I'm here tonight to represent Working for Waders. Most of you I haven't met, so I'll just very quickly introduce myself. So I operate as a specialist land management consultant. I travel around Scotland carrying out wading bird surveys that follow the waders from their arrival in April, March, April, right through to departure with the fledged chicks in June, July and early August. I'm also a trainee ringer. I am 4 subjects and 1 species away from being a qualified ringer. So last 2 seasons up here in Angus and Deeside, I've been ringing lapwing, oyster catcher and curlew chicks. So I've been a land manager for about 40 years and hugely fortunate to be surrounded by wading birds in the spring of each year since the mid-80s. It's true to say that many of our farland wading birds have declined up here over the years. However, we still have populations of lapwing, oyster catcher and curlew nested not too far from my home here in Trevelyan and Angus. And many of you will have heard of the Angus Glens. So a lot of my survey work takes part in the Angus Glens. And we're very fortunate to have large populations of different species of wading birds round about the Angus Glens. So basically been asked to summarise the 2025 season up here. I think a one-line answer would be that it was an awful lot better than the 2024 season. 2024 season, we had a very, very cold snap in June. We had no insects at all during 10 days, maybe 14 days. And the flip side of that was that we got almost no wader chicks at all off the ground last year. So, if anything, this year was a complete contrast to that because we've had a very, very warm and dry summer. We've actually received quite a few reports about failed nests, probably due to the soil being too hard and dry, no insects for the lapwing chicks, and too hard for forest and oyster catcher chicks. Anyway, however, the upland areas round about here managed to get a good number of broods away. So a good number of chicks in many, many areas. Up here in Deeside, I observed healthy broods of lapwing from late May and flocks of fledged chicks in May and June. And also witnessed lapwing chicks, presumably second broods in late July. Again, a good number of oyster catchers as well. So on to the main subject of tonight's webinar is the curlew. So the curlew up here in Scotland, I would say we've got a very, very mixed picture. As you travel up and down the country from one end to the other, there's some very, very worrying reports. My friend and colleague in the beating heart of Working for Waders, Partner Glory, reports that many of those that have previously provided data for curlew nests no longer have adult birds with them. So to me, given the lifespan of a curlew, that's hugely worrying because that's obviously been something that's been developing over the last 20 years. And to lose all your curlew altogether is very, very sad. The flip side of that is that I'm hugely fortunate up here in Angus. We had one estate reported to be 25 curlew nests on about 20,000 acres of hill. I made several trips to that estate and was lucky enough to ring several chicks around the 21-day-old mark. So we watched these chicks from an early age. We didn't want to bring them too early. We wanted to get some idea of what was getting off the ground. So we waited until they were 21 days old and then we rung them. So hopefully we'll see some of those come back again.
Sorry, can you be winding up, please?
Yes. So what I was going to wind up with was we have a couple of huge concerns up here. And one is that Working for Waders is currently working unfunded. Nature Scot have not given us any funding this year. And the other one is a very worrying trend that many of our wader-rich habitats are now being planted in trees up here in Scotland. There's been several high-profile land acquisitions taking place in Scotland in recent years. The new owners are coming in and scrapping all habitat management, scrapping all predator control, and the flip side of that is an almost instant decline in wading bird numbers. So I think that's something that we need to watch closely up here. Working for Waders has met with Scottish Forestry to discuss the criteria on which these planting applications are assessed. Because many of the areas that have been planted have been historic strongholds for wading birds and especially curlew.
That's really worrying. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm sorry to finish on such a negative note. We've seen in the southern uplands how quickly curlew can disappear under trees. So thank you very much, Bruce. And over now, we're going to stay in Scotland for Thijs Claes. I'm sorry, I've said that wrongly. Thijs Claes from RSPB Scotland. Give us some good news from the Inchmarshes.
Hi, Graham. Thank you. My name is Thijs. I'm a States Operations Manager at Inchmarshes, but for tonight, I'll say I used to manage the Curlew Life project here on the reserve. So I'll talk you through our data from this year a bit. So we are up there in the middle of the mainland of Scotland, kind of a hot spot for curlew in the middle of nothing. You can see the blue spots next to the green spot. That's where we just were. So we went a bit left and north. And that's where we are. So we have 800 hectares of functioning floodplain on the reserve with a highly complex mix of marsh, fen and grassland habitats, obviously very good for waders. We manage that with sheep, cattle and horses and do some additional cutting with tractors and to get a good sport. We have a very diverse predator guild, including wildcat, pine martens, birds of prey, otters. We've got everything you can imagine in the UK, basically, that could eat a curlew. And we do very little fox control, and that's the only type of predator management we do. We don't put up any fences or anything like that. We are in an after curlew life phase, so we did a lot of monitoring in the past 4 years, and this year was the first year after curlew life. So I tried to keep the data coming in basically without the resources from curlew life this year. I did that with we did that with 3 visits, still modified Brown and Smith surveys, and we have still about 98 curlew pairs on the reserve according to the surveys. So that's about 1 curlew pair for 8 hectares of floodplain. And if you add up all the other waders there, that's still incredible numbers for the mainland of Scotland. Now, we are aware that that's an overestimation because of how we have to do our wader surveys. It's very difficult terrain. There's a lot of waders, so they take a long time. And all of our survey areas are very small, which means that we are prone to double counting some of our birds. So that's an overestimation slightly. But you can see the dots on the reserve from the 3rd visit of curlew this season. So still good numbers, good density. And this is the long-term trend. So we are up there. We are stable for the last 20 years and 25 years, and we are seeing the last 5 to 10 years, we're seeing kind of like an upward trend again, due to Curlew life, hopefully, but also some hydrology work we've been doing on the reserve. And yeah, in context with the other waders, you can see how many there actually are. It is difficult to compare this data. Again, like I said, it's a high density site, so it's really difficult to compare these numbers with other sites. I have to say that. The next thing, of course, is productivity. What we've looked into a lot in the past few years. So we did some radio tagging, we did some 5-visit territory success methods, and we know where our chicks go now, and it's been really useful to have Curlew Life. But this year, the only thing we've really managed to do is that last option there, coordinated Curlew productivity count. So we did something new. We tried something new, which is counting well-feathered and fledged chicks, much like the Bolton method for lapwing productivity. And this is our results on predator productivity. So very, very high territory success across the whole reserve, 82% of territory success. The average between our compartment is 64. So that's the difference between those two numbers there. So we do have some compartments on the reserve that don't do that well, and we have some that do really, really, really well. So that's interesting on itself. This is the results of our fledgling count. So we counted 15 well-feathered chicks on the first survey, and then 3 well-feathered and 20 fledged chicks on the second count. So that's the Bolton method, and adding them up, we come to 38 chicks. So this is a method we're gonna do in the foreseeable future to compare our success in the next couple of years, going on from now. And thank you for your attention. And that was me.
Thank you very much for sticking to time. Much appreciated. We move a little further south to the uplands of England. And Tom, Tom Orde-Powlett, if you'd like to talk to us.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. So I live and work and manage my family's estate in Wensleydale, North Yorkshire, the Bolton Castle estate. We've got about 250 pairs of curlews nesting here, and then we're also engaging a lot with neighbours. So I'd say probably up to 300, probably 50 more on neighbouring land that sort of our keepers have engaged with farmers and have found nests and so on, and observing them throughout the season and for breeding success. About half of the estate is heather moorland, managed for grouse shooting, but also for water quality, carbon sequestration, sheep grazing, and so on as well. A lot of public access and engagement on there. Of the remaining half, it's probably 40% grassland and 10% woodland. So if you think of the down from the heather moorland, it's actually sort of 20% woodland if you look at it in that regard, that half of the estate. The grassland is about 30% dairy, which is our most sort of production focused or intensive form of agriculture in this area, and that obviously poses challenges that I know you'll all be familiar with. We have made some good progress on that sort of ground, though. Formerly our gamekeepers, now our conservation department, have been finding more and more nests every year, and once they found them one year, they tend to find them quite quickly the next. We also were fortunate to get a grant for a drone, partly through the FIPL fund, which we only sort of got the training in later on in the season, but we've used that to good effect. And one night, actually, even before that, we saved 24 eggs and chicks from some silage fields that were about to be cut. And that was a great, very successful evening. And as everyone joked then, if only it was that easy all the time. But the keepers do put in a huge amount of time, or why we're now calling them the conservation department, on waders and other things, and delivering great results with that, not just on the moorland, where the habitat is beneficial for them, the heather cutting, burning, so on, the sort of mosaic of habitats and the predator control there, is delivering great results. But to be able to get more and more chicks away on the silage fields is really encouraging. We seem to be finding that they can, on silage fields, despite being sort of monocultures of Italian ryegrass, they don't starve. But even where the farmers are being very careful to sort of mow round the nests and then avoid mowing the chicks, you're left with a very, very bare, short sward. So I think probably the impacts of predation are maybe exacerbated a bit by that. So there is still room for improvement. And I think next year on the silage fields, I think a lot of the farmers have agreed they're going to leave bigger areas uncut around the nest, and then they're going to leave those uncut areas throughout the season. So hopefully they'll provide a bit of cover for the chicks. Another thing we've noticed, sadly, this year, probably more as a result of just observing them more and saving more chicks in there. We have had several chicks run over on roads, and because the silage fields aren't grazed, you don't need to close the gates. So we're actually now looking at closing all the gates and rabbit wiring them up to hopefully stop the chicks wandering onto the roads and save some more like that. Over the last 10 years, we've been working with the British Trust for Ornithology, which has been brilliant and rewarding, and very looking at the more detailed science and research. This year, things specific to this year, very droughty, as I know Bruce mentioned, in Scotland. Despite that, the insect hatches and insect life seems to have been fantastic, and we did get some rain just as we thought it was starting to dry out. Well, not dry out, but the insects were starting to decline. So I think that was fortunately not as big an issue as it might have been. On the upland areas, the curlews, tend to have wet flushes and things within their sort of territory and range anyway. So there are permanent wetter features. More and more red kites in the area this year, as well as large gulls. But I don't know whether that's had an impact or not, but we're certainly seeing a lot more of them. And aside from that, it's probably worth mentioning, because we've been, doing this work for several years, we've had meetings with lots of the villagers in the pubs, taking people out onto the ground. So the villagers are really good and on side generally, and keeping dogs really well under control and on footpaths, which was a big issue 4, 5, 6 years ago. Likewise, the farmers have been brilliant, and they're contacting us where they think there's curlews in fields. We do still have problems and issues, and late springs and lots of molehills, and they all want to chain harrow the fields when lapwings are nesting, or they all want to, but these challenges cause them to need to do operations that aren't necessarily advantageous for waders. But we're really getting some very positive engagement from them, and I think saving and fledging more chicks as a result. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I think the key word you finished there was engagement. So well done. It's lovely to hear somebody who understands the land and the people and the farming and the neighbourhoods talking about curlew. So thank you. On to Matt Trevelyan, who's also in North Yorkshire.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to speak about our curlew project in Nidderdale National Landscape, which is just south from Tom. There's 2 pictures here which I think define everything. There's one rather sad picture of a chick which is killed by a buzzard, and then some 2 rather nice fledged chicks on both pictures from the Darley Beck project. Moving on swiftly, before I move on, I've got to thank everybody that's involved in our projects, the volunteers, the farmers and project managers. Special thanks to Kate Wright, Clive White, and my photographers, and everybody who's contributed to my slides. I'm very much a messenger. So I'm going to speak briefly about the Darley Beck Curlew project, the one that I know the best and that I'm most closely involved with, but very close to that is another one, the Hartwith Curlew project, and then a project at Denton Reserve at the south of the landscape, and then just a couple of words from a moorland contact. And I want to just mention the Choreo app. So our volunteers in both Hartwith and Darley Beck all used this Choreo app, which really improved our ability to do the work, made life much easier for field workers in both our projects. I hope we can talk about that in at the Curlew Action Field Workers Conference later. So just to mention that both Darley Beck and Hartwith are typical of Nidderdale's sort of fringe Pennine landscape, beef, sheep and dairy farming, quite intensive, some of it, considerable amount of woodland and some rough grazing. So really mixed landscape, pastoral landscape, but with silage making and hay making, and quite a lot of pressure from farming. This is an indication of the citizen science effort. So you can see there's 26 people submitted records from Curlew, individual users. So that's a huge team of citizen scientists and thousands of observations plugged into the app. So quite closely monitored, these projects. Also, just to say that our definition of fledging in the Darley Beck project is quite strict, and it really is quite an old bird. Must have all its dark primary tail feathers fully developed. Yeah, you can see the use of the Curlew app, really thousands of observations, not just of curlew sightings, but also of farming activity and various other items that people can put into the app very easily. This work was really developed by Kate Wright, this app, and has been a big success. Darley Beck is approximately 29 territories over 400 hectares, so we're quite lucky in Nidderdale. We still have returning curlews, but you can see that there's not many chicks fledging from that. We've got 7 fledged chicks this year, possibly an 8th, but we're very strict. And obviously it's quite hard to count fledged chicks, but we're assuming that 1 fledged chick from each successful nest, not much more than that. And just to say, there's a couple of special things that happen in Nidderdale. Clive White is our project manager who founded the project. We've got this technique to clear livestock from the favoured field where the territorial curlew have been observed, and the fields around that favoured field are intentionally populated with livestock to sort of encourage the curlew to nest in the favoured nest field. So that works to some extent. But later interventions this year, saving chicks before the mower, there was some success with that, and also driving older chicks out of the field by walking the field. But there is a considerable number of hectares where cutting was delayed or interventions happened. And all this data that is input by the volunteers results in very detailed nest histories or histories for each pair of curlew. And there's very individual problems for each nest, including egg predation and destruction, cattle, sheep, gulls, crows, jackdaws. We saw quite a lot of chick predation from buzzards this year. Possibly the foxes were controlled quite well, but unfortunately quite a lot of chicks were taken later by buzzards. Predation is always made easier by a lack of cover, and we can't afford to pay farmers what we would like to sacrifice their crops. But the farmers participate brilliantly and are wonderful, but we can't ask them too much. There's a simple way of looking at it: 88 eggs laid, 16 eggs lost, 72 chicks hatched, but only 7 chicks confirmed fledged. Another way of looking at it, this waterfall diagram, you can sort of see the gradual loss of curlew. I'm going to move on swiftly though. There you go, the main reasons. We can split up the causes of losses. Yeah, I'm going to keep moving, but you can see it's predation is a real problem. Right, moving swiftly on to Hartwith Curlew project. Hartwith fledged 6 chicks from 13 known nests. So approximately getting to that the rate needed to stabilize the population. Doing very well, really. There you are. They also used the Curlew app. There's all those dots of data across the project area. The lines are the flight paths. There you can see the territories. We're going to keep moving on, but I think it's worth mentioning climate. We had less pairs sticking, actually nesting. So pairs returning but not actually making nests. Possibly they just weren't in good enough condition. A quick word about Denton Reserve. Denton's an interesting project because it's a mixture of regenerative farming and rewilding. There is still a little bit of predator control, but it's quite an interesting approach. Not a single species project by any means, but they do have considerable number of curlew on the moorland and on the farmland, with innovative grazing, with white park cattle, etc. They had some success this year. They found and protected 5 nests on the farmland, far more nests on the moor. Use of the drone, yeah. Keep going. Nidderdale Moors. So from a quick word with a moorland friend, there was good results from moorland, but less smaller broods, 2s and 3s rather than 4s. And I'll leave it there. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Matthew. And I will move straight on to Craig Ralston from the Derwent Valley, please.
So I'm Craig Ralston. I'm the Senior Reserve Manager for Lower Derwent Valley National Nature Reserve in Yorkshire. So just a bit further south than everyone else, about 6 miles southeast of York. So I'm going to cover Lower Derwent Valley, but I'll just touch on the wider Vale of York area as well. 1,000 hectares of lowland floodplains on the River Derwent catchment. So it looks like this in the winter. And in the summer, these fantastic MG4 hay meadows. So that's the Greater Burnet Meadow Foxtail community. Big open fields, but the community, whilst we've got this nice MG4, we also grade down the hydrological unit through all the other various communities to swamp areas. So that's kind of quite significant for our breeding wader populations. So I'm guessing we're talking a kind of similar feel to the inch marshes we heard about earlier. Perhaps most importantly for me, I think, is the fact that although 700 hectares of the site of that 1,000 hectares is in conservation ownership, 300 hectares being in private ownership and managed through agri-environment schemes, it's still largely let in the old traditional historic strips. So on the old ownership systems, which means whilst you might have a big single field like you have here, there might be several individual farmers that either own or let that from conservation bodies, which effectively gives time and space for curlews, but a whole other range of kind of bird species to move, and effectively kind of slows down the haircut to something that might be a little bit more akin to historic. So that just gives you a kind of flavour of the site. Stretches over about 17 kilometres of the River Derwent and its floodplain. In terms of the 2025 season, actually pretty good. We had really good hatching success. Our pairs were around 67 this year, 67 pairs across 1,000 hectares. Which is about stable, on par with the last few years, but we have seen, a bit like Inch Marshes, an uptick in the last sort of 5-10 years after a bit of a dip. But we had a very delayed season due to the drought. These MG4 meadows just didn't start growing until quite late. And as a result of that, the curlew were late. When the grass did get away, it seemed like it provided the cover necessary to reduce crow predation, which we think is our major issue, not mammalian predation. So we ended up with a very successful season in terms of hatching success. 34 broods seen, of which our fledging success, or how we judge our fledging success, is the number of large young, effectively, well, fledged, older than this. But this is the size we were picking up around the 21st of June. But we had 29 as a minimum of fledged young this year. Probably higher than that, but we're only picking them up when they're running around in amongst the haircut. Haircut-wise, because it was a late season for the grass to get away, it was a late season for cutting. in that farmers delayed their cuts anyway to try and get a bit more crop. We have a 6th of July haircut anyway, where there is curlew present and we know there's broods. We can delay that either on our own conservation ownership or by using the agri-environment schemes to push that back to the 15th of July. But we've also got a handful of corncrakes on this site and are presently taking part in a reintroduction scheme. So we've got the ability using agri-environment to push that back even further. So whilst it was an early season, a late season, and it pushed the birds back, the haircut season got pushed back as well. So essentially here we've got really good full agricultural control, and the success in this year was pretty good. I think that's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Craig. And now we change habitat rather as we move to the Brexon. Harry Ewing.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Harry. I'm a research ecologist at the BTO and I study curlew in Breckland. Breckland is down here in eastern England. It hosts around 150 pairs of breeding curlew. It's an arable dominated region and it's really, really dry, but we do have quite large patches of grassland interspersed across this landscape, and that's where the majority of curlew breed. These are my field sites across the landscape, and within those field sites there's around 55 to 65 pairs of birds breeding every year. So my monitoring for the last sort of 3 years has been conducted as part of the Natural England funded Curlew Solutions trial project, which is overseen by the Curlew Recovery Partnership. And the main aim of that project for the last few years has been trialling nest fences. We've also been deploying a lot of nest cameras on nests too. So this year, in total, I found 58 curlew nests across the Brecks. 16 of those hatched, and 42 failed, of which 40 were predated. From those 16 hatched nests, 10 chicks fledged. So if we look at that on a graph, so the green bar here represents hatching success, and you can see that hatching success in 2025 was around 25%, and the yellow bar represents fledging success, and it was around 17% in 2025. Now, if we compare that to my other, 6 field seasons in the Brecks, we can see that it wasn't a great field season, but it wasn't like the worst field season I've ever had. So it was pretty average. And that was despite it being a really, really, really dry year this year. What we can also see from this graph is that we do have some peaks in breeding productivity. So this line represents breeding productivity, and you can see that every sort of 3 years or so, we have a good year or a comparatively good year where breeding productivity reaches around 0.4 fledged chicks per pair. And that is primarily due to higher rates of hatching success. Because you can also see from this graph that fledging success very, very rarely reaches above 25%. So that's kind of limiting the overall breeding productivity that we see in the Brecks. And as I said, the Brecks is really, really affected by dry weather. Those wet years in 2021 and 2024 are far better for hatching and breeding productivity than the dry years. So I mentioned that we've been deploying a lot of nest cameras, and I'll really quickly just talk through some of the broad findings of that study. So we observed or recorded 8 species of nest predator over the last couple of years in Breckland. Foxes, by far and away the most common nest predator, and also badger and stoat were pretty common as well. We also observed some quite weird nest predators, or slightly unusual at least. So red deer, red kite took 2 nests this year, and also marsh harrier. So we have a very diverse suite of nest predators in my area. However, the majority of the nest predation is kind of conducted by mammals, and that's why our nest fencing that we've been deploying have worked really, really well. So again, you can see quickly on this graph that the fenced nests have a much higher hatching rate than the unfenced nests, both in 2024 and 2025, the 2 years in which we've deployed fences. And you can see in 2024, those fenced nests had a hatching success of over 85%, so really effective. So what's next for our project? Well, we're going to be applying for more Natural England funding, and we're going to be focusing our kind of monitoring effort on chick survival, but also the predators of chicks as well. So we're going to do some quite intensive monitoring of those over the next few years, hopefully if our funding comes through. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Harry. And it's good to see that those fences are working because I know they take a lot of work. And it's over to the Thames Valley for Anne Cotton, please.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Anne Cotton. I work for Natural England, and I'm also part of the Upper Thames Wader Group working on curlew conservation in Oxfordshire. So in case you haven't heard of our project, we've been going since around 2020, and we're a partnership of organisations working on various catchments of the Upper Thames around Oxford. We work mainly with volunteers to fence curlew nests in these areas, and our land includes the large RSPB reserve at Otmore and various wildlife trust reserves, but also a great deal of land owned by private landowners. For the last 2 years, we've been participating in the Curlew Solutions trial, like Harry, who did the last talk. So we've been using the nest cameras and data loggers, and we've also benefited from 3 field workers to help the volunteers gather the data that's required. So how was our 2025 season? Well, after 2 years of complaining that it was too wet, this year it was too dry. No, but joking apart, it was a much better year this year, because in our area, dry is definitely better than wet for curlew. But it did bring a few challenges. For example, in the early spring, because the grass was still so short, it just wasn't growing. So we did see some delayed nesting because I think the curlew felt that there wasn't enough cover for them to start laying. So this photo, it's hard to see, I know, but in the distance in this photo, there's one little sedgy area of the field, and that's where they chose to lay. The other thing that happened in some parts of our area is, so particularly where there are more sort of grazed, sheep grazed areas, because of the shortage of grass, the sheep were having to be moved from field to field a lot more often than usual. And so when the curlew had just settled to nest in a field, suddenly the sheep would be put in and the curlew would have to move again. So yeah, that caused them problems. And then later in the season, once we did have some chicks around, we found in our area that the farmers were wanting to cut hay earlier than usual because the warm weather had meant that the grasses and so on had matured earlier, so the hay was ready earlier than usual. So interesting to hear how that was different from one of the earlier talks. And then, yeah, that was also a problem for the chicks because they weren't able to fly yet, and the farmers were wanting to cut the hay. So this slide shows this year's totals compared to previous years, and you can see first of all down the left-hand side, the number of curlew pairs does appear to have been slightly increasing in the area, which is really good news. However, from the data, we know that this increase is almost exclusively down to the RSPB reserve at Otmore, and unfortunately, the populations in the other areas, on the other catchments, are slightly decreasing. Not much, but just slightly creeping down, which is worrying. And those sort of satellite populations are very vulnerable to being lost unless we can get the numbers there to increase too. And the other thing I just wanted to pull out from this slide, which is a really good piece of good news, is that this year we got our highest number of fledged juveniles since the project began. So we had 15 fledged juveniles across the Upper Thames this year, which was really good. And even better, they were from several different catchments as well. So as you can see, our number of fenced nests has been steadily increasing each year since the project started, and that's shown by the blue line. But the orange line, which shows the number of fledged juveniles, has not been nice and neatly increasing alongside it, unfortunately. It's much more variable, and I think that reflects the fact that although the fencing has been shown to be very effective at protecting the nests up until hatching, the survival of the chicks thereafter is affected by other things which the nest fencing alone can't address. So things like predation and the weather and management of fields and disturbance and things like that. So I just wanted to share a couple of pictures from our season. So in the top left-hand corner, we have, this was a bit of a shock, we have a loose dog inside one of our curlew nest fences. How it got in, I don't know, presumably jumped. But thankfully, it didn't seem to notice the curlew or its nest, and it was more preoccupied with trying to get out of the fence again. So that was a relief, but just shows how important it is to keep raising the message, or, you know, letting people know what a risk loose dogs are to curlew. So we're thinking about some more signage for this year. Then in the top right, the Nest cameras picked up an interesting series of shots showing an altercation between a curlew and a crow. And as you can see in this picture, the crow did get right up to the nest. But what was good is that after this picture was taken, the curlew fought back, and it did fight off the crow and protected all the eggs. Unfortunately, one was just slightly damaged and didn't hatch as a result. Then in the bottom left, we've got a nice shot of what's supposed to happen. So a happy curlew on its nest with a newly hatched chick. And then in the bottom right-hand corner, we've got a couple of newly fledged juveniles. So these are 38 days old, and these are from one of our sites in the Cherwell Valley, which was successful again this year. And just a couple of quick plugs. So firstly, if you haven't seen our film yet, do watch it. It's very good. Just search for Elli Rivers on YouTube and you can find out more about our project. And secondly, we have a fundraiser running at the moment to raise money for the continuation of our project, which won't be benefiting from Natural England funding in the coming year, as far as I'm aware. I'll pop the link in the chat, and we'd be very grateful if you could either donate yourselves or share it with your friends, family, or on social media to try and hopefully increase the donations. And if you'd like to hear more about our 2025 season, we've got a local meeting ourselves on the 20th of November. It's an online talk like this, where you can find out more about our year in sort of more detail with speakers from all the different catchments. And lastly, I can't do one of these talks without thanking the landowners and volunteers who make all this work possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I will forgive you for the fundraising pitch, I suppose.
Thank you.
All of these projects need more money, and curlews need more money generally. And it's a bit west, over to Elli, who's going to be talking about the New Forest curlews.
Great, thank you. Okay, hello, I'm Elli Rivers. I work for Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust in the south of England. I'm theoretically trying to finish my PhD still, so hopefully that's going to happen in my lifetime. I'm going to talk about our season in the New Forest this year. Although it was slightly more limited fieldwork, I was focusing just on radio tagging and chick survival, so we didn't have the sort of comprehensive survey effort that we've had in the past. Hampshire Ornithological Society were doing a wader survey in the New Forest this year, so they've done much more extensive work with a massive team of volunteers at different times through the season. So I think we're still waiting for their final numbers on adult counts. So all I can say is previously we've been around sort of 28 to 35 pairs. I wouldn't like to say for this year because we were so focused on chicks. So we only monitored 14 nests this year, which is a lot less than previously. We had quite a challenging season, sort of took me by surprise really. There was a change in Forestry England deer management policy right at the point when normally the predator management would start. And so there wasn't the focus on predator management that would normally have been happening over the last couple of years as we're going into the critical nesting period. I can't say at the moment because I haven't finished my analysis really what happened, but we saw a sudden increase in nest predation, quite unprecedented, which was making nest finding extremely difficult. Adult behaviour was very hard to read because we were having nests lost, I think, before we could find them. So I actually ended up with a pretty small sample of nests. But we got 26 tags out, which wasn't terrible. We had restricted study area as well. I lost an area in the forest that we'd normally have surveyed, so my sample size wasn't as broad as I'd hoped. And we also weren't working with trail cameras. I took a decision that I just wanted to leave, after we'd found the nest, I just wanted to weigh the eggs, get a predicted hatch date, and then leave them until we were ready to tag the chicks and just minimise the intervention as much as we possibly could. So yeah, we didn't have predator identities for this year. Of these nests that hatched, we had 26 chicks. Yeah, so we covered the Burley, Brockenhurst and Bewley areas. As with nest finding, we also had a much harder time this season with radio tracking. My best guess at the moment is that it's possibly due to more tags had gone down holes, like foxholes, and may have gone beyond our signal reach. We had sort of 98% recovery over the last 2 years. So again, that kind of took me by surprise how difficult it was this year. Perhaps we had predators that were taking them well out of our search area, such as marsh harriers or, mammalian, we're not sure. We did really extensive surveys of all the areas known for nesting marsh harriers, because we did see a lot of passes of them over our breeding habitats, but we didn't have any success with that. And we had 3 chicks fledged successfully. 4 were found dead in poor condition, looking primarily malnourished, very underweight. 8 of them were clearly avian predated, so up a nest or the tag was next to a pile of plucked feathers. 3 down holes. We did put trail cameras up by the holes to see if we could get a predator identity, but unfortunately they'd moved on by that point. And then 3 that were unknown predation, so we just had a tag and no other clear evidence as to what the predator identity was. And then these 5 that were out of our search region. So yeah, we also continued with biometrics. We were doing weekly weigh-ins and measuring tarsus toe. And saw some really big differences in body size across the forest, as we found last year. It was really quite dramatic, the difference between some of the chicks in different areas, and it seemed to be consistent to the areas that they would be. They were larger in the Bewley area, almost doubling their weight each week, and then the chicks further north were potentially only putting on a few grams. So there's potentially huge differences in the forage availability, I'm thinking, but it's not something we've been looking at yet. So we had a few escapees this year that weren't radio tagged, and of those we had 3 fledged chicks out of the untagged group. So we had 6 fledged chicks across the forest overall, which is a big drop on previous years. So the last 2 years we had a fairly consistent 17 to 18 fledged chicks. So yeah, a lot fewer this year, sadly. Yeah, so we've got quite a lot to unpack this season, and I think we were surprised to see that the nest predation increased quite as rapidly as it did, potentially due to the management change. So I think there's going to be quite a lot to learn from this year, even if it wasn't our most positive one yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, and I'm sorry it was such a depressing year, and good luck finishing your PhD.
Thank you, I need it.
Over to Jon Avon, who is in Dartmoor.
Right, okay, very briefly, 5 minutes. Dartmoor, basically for those of you who don't know Dartmoor project, after 20 years of monitoring curlew, there was no improvement over the last 20 years, and they were heading for extinction. So as a result of that, we've got we did have a 5-year project. And as a result of that, we had a 5-year project funded by the King's Charitable Trust to have 5 years worth of head starting by Slimbridge and the WWT team, also supported by Dartmoor National Park, Natural England and RSPB. Now this 5-year project was basically looking at habitat management, to investigate the predator problems and to look at recolonisation of the old breeding grounds. So before this season started, we've been doing some really large-scale landscape works now on habitat on previous breeding sites and flailing the vegetation. This is quite very large scale, and the combination of flailing, grazing, and some pond creation in the next slide. And this is basically in the central Dartmoor, where we're hoping to recolonize with the curlew. It's a huge project. We're really getting underway now with all sorts of machinery and funding through FIPL grants, etc. And it is targeting these old curlew sites. And the bigger picture, this area which was created in the spring, huge areas of re-wetting going on, and this is leading up to a 20-year landscape and nature recovery program. So this is all hand in hand with the curlew work. So this year, it's been a very good year for Dartmoor, I have to say. We started with a blank canvas. We were down to almost extinction levels with the last pair or so. This year, and I'll explain in the next slide, it's seen the return of birds across the moor. Not only the wild birds, such as this one on East Dartmoor. This was the year where our first head-started birds returned, and 3 birds were seen. Only 1 was identified by its colouring, but the challenge we have on Dartmoor is 1, finding the birds, and 2, seeing what's on their legs or not. But that's one of our bigger challenges. Wherever they are, whether they're in fields or on the open moorland, they are devils to find, and they do have a habit of hiding away very nicely. This is a head-started bird that sat down, but I've noticed it with the wild birds as well. They are very difficult to find, so that's a challenge. Up on the high moor, I mean, it's a huge area for us to try to cover, and we get reports of curlew, and trying to find them is you know, you're looking at that picture, how do you find a curlew in that sort of landscape? It's quite a challenge. One thing that has helped us on Dartmoor, and WWT and Jordan Pargeter there has been out and about with audio recorders and monitors. There's a company in Chagford, local to Dartmoor, called Wild Connect, who have kindly loaned 8 of these monitors. We put them out on remote sites, and they've been incredibly useful finding or recording curlew where we're not seeing them, and that's actually helped us establish the presence of curlew and identified some territories for us in these wilder areas. You can see, just looking at the map in the corner there, the areas that the little blue scale, the blue marks there, is where the recorders were put out this year, right across the moor. So now I'll spend a bit of time on this one, because this is a 40-year history of where curlew have been on Dartmoor, basically. And what's happened is, if you start in the top left hand side, you go back to the late 1970s and early 80s, you will see that the curlew were breeding on the right hand side on East Dartmoor, a big concentration in central Dartmoor, another concentration on the left in the west, with a few on the northern edge and a couple on the southern half of Dartmoor. Now that was 40 years ago. If you then go a decade or so later, you will see that the same pattern exists in early 90s. Again, East Dartmoor, Central Dartmoor, big cluster, and then a few around the north and the west. And then if you look at 2005, that's basically when the crash happened. And that third graph will illustrate that basically we were down to a few pairs on Eastern Dartmoor and 1 nesting attempt in the centre. And that has been the case for the last 20 years. The Devon Birds Atlas, which was 2007 to 2013, again confirmed that period of East Dartmoor holding the last of the birds, 1 in the west. At that stage, we were looking at extinction levels, because we'd only had 5 chicks in 20 years, and hence the project kicked in 21. The 2021 would be the same as the 2013 in many ways. But if you fast forward to the last 3 years, 23, the first head starting happened in 21 and 22. And then in 23, you'll notice the squares on that Dartmoor map is where curlew started reappearing and where we got records. So a few more in the centre, a couple in the south, 3 in the north. 2004 was a bad year with poor spring, so we had very few birds return to central Dartmoor last year, but we had double the number in the north. And then if you fast forward to 25, which is this year, which is the best year we've had for 30 years, really, you've got a slight extension of tetrads being used on East Dartmoor. You've got a whole cluster in the centre, as you can see. The numbers in the north, the tetrads in the north with curlew have increased again, with a few in the west and a few in the south. So in total this year, we're up to 43 tetrads with curlew activity compared to 11 or to 13 during these last 20 years. So a huge increase. The one interesting thing about these maps as well is the little blue dots you see are the areas where the head started birds fed after their release. So these may well be more returning birds. These may well be head started birds. The challenge is we don't know whether that's true or not. But basically this year we're up to 11 territories, which is the first time in 30 years. We've got 4 pairs, including one in the north and one in the centre, and that hasn't happened for 16 years. So what you're looking at on Dartmoor, I think, is recolonisation. I think the productivity, which everybody else is talking about, we're not at that stage yet. But hopefully over the next few years, if this map continues to infill, then maybe we'll be making progress and recovery. In addition to Dartmoor, head-started birds are also now on Bodmin Moor, and there's one bird in the Severn and Avon Vale. So this project, I think, probably it's early days, but it is sort of showing signs of recovery for Dartmoor and beyond.
Thank you, and thank you very much. And you've nicely introduced us to the Severn by taking sending one of your birds up there. So I'd like to ask Dan Gornall to talk to us now, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Gornall, Research Officer at WWT, and I lead the fieldwork on the Severn Avon Vale Curlew project. We've also been participating in the Curlew Solutions trial over the last couple of years. So for those not familiar with the project and the study area, it is situated in Gloucestershire and Worcestershire, and the study sites consist of lowland floodplain hay meadows that run alongside the rivers Severn and Avon. I'll start by mentioning the weather quickly, mainly because 2025 was a complete contrast in relation to 2024, when we saw extensive flooding right throughout the spring, with many of our field sites completely underwater. 2025, however, we experienced drought right throughout the season, and yeah, our study sites were bone dry throughout. Both weather extremes are likely to have had various direct and indirect effects on the breeding curlew. But one obvious takeaway was that in 2025, we didn't lose any nests due to flooding, which is quite unusual for the Severn Avon Vale. So on to the results from this season. We monitored a total of 34 pairs, and from these we confirmed 25 pairs to breed. And from these 25 pairs, we monitored 30 nesting attempts, 5 of which were second clutches. So the nest outcomes, from the 30 nests that we followed, 26 of these failed, and that was 18 at egg stage and 8 at chick stage. And egg stage failures here, 13 were lost due to predation. 1 was abandoned, 2 were trampled by livestock, and 2 failed for unknown reasons. And on to chick stage failures. We know that 2 broods were definitely predated, 4 more presumed to be predated, and 2 broods lost due to hay cut. So this leaves just 4 remaining pairs, which were successful and managed to fledge a total of 6 chicks, giving us a productivity of 0.2 per nesting attempt. Just a quick note on nest fencing. So we fenced 8 nests this year, 6 of which hatched. The hatching rate was much better on fenced nests. Of course, the sample size here for 2025 alone is quite small, but larger scale analysis across multiple years still shows a positive nest fencing effect for us. So moving on to chicks, we ringed a total of 36 chicks this year, 22 of which were radio tagged. We find radio tagging vital in the Severn Vale for following the chicks throughout the landscape. The radio tags are also very useful for tracking down chicks once they're big enough and fit in colour rings. This can be quite tricky in the long grassy hay meadows that we work in. And radio tags also help with gathering evidence on final brood outcomes, but also potential, gathering evidence for reasons for failure. So yeah, this year we managed to track 1 radio tag down, which ended up being inside a buzzard pellet. Another was tracked down to a fox cache. And finally, a quick note on head starts in the Severn Vale this year. 3 head starts were observed back. 2 of those were from the 2019 release, Slimbridge, and 1 of those was from the Dartmoor project. This means our total number of recruited head starts remains at 6. We didn't have any additional recruits in 2025. However, it was nice to see J5 from the Dartmoor project return for a 2nd year and successfully breed and fledge 1 chick. And that's it for me. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for helping us to catch up a bit on time. But the next talk was going to be from Phil Hitchen in Worcestershire. He's not able to be with us. He did send a report, which I'm sure we'll put into a forthcoming newsletter, but I'm just going to skip it by just saying 1 or 2 quick sentences before passing on to Bethan. Basically, Worcestershire, the sites that are away from the Severn Valley, which is also monitored by WWT, did really very badly, and Worcestershire is in great danger of losing the curlew that it's got. And the message from Phil and his colleagues is, it's a shame that the 5-year project for the Severn Vale that the WWT have been running is coming to an end, and they hope that funding can be found for some further work there and possibly to get some head started birds up into their area. So let's, moving on from Worcestershire, we move a little bit west and a little bit north and over to Bethan Beech, who's in Wales.
Yes, so my name is Bethan Beech. I'm employed by Natural Resources Wales, but my post is actually funded directly by the Welsh Government to work on curlew in Wales. So I'm very lucky in that respect. The main work I do is to work with Gulfeini'r Cymru, or Curlew Wales. And for those of you who may not be aware, Gulfeini'r Cymru is made up of 18 different organisations working together to benefit curlew in Wales, and was set up following a seminar that Mary ran in Builth Wales in 2018. So Curlew Wales was set up at the same time as the CRP in England. So in Wales, we're currently in a situation where we estimate the breeding pairs to be between 400 and 500 breeding pairs. In Wales, we work on an important curlew area basis, which is the map you can see there. This was devised as part of the action plan for curlew in Wales that was published in 2021. And these 12 important curlew areas are in fact administrative boundaries. They were drawn up by the lead organisation for each of those ICAs, but they were modelled in 2020 to hold about 60 5% of the curlew population of Wales. So the data I have really is from within the 12 important curlew areas, plus an additional area in Gwent that is monitored by a fantastic team of volunteers led by Verity Picken, who I think some of you may know. So even though the ICAs here are administrative boundaries, they do, of course, reflect where most of the curlew are found. And you can see in Wales, there's a sort of an eastern bias. So in the last 30 years, we have in fact lost curlew to a great extent from Anglesey, from the Llyn Peninsula and from Pembrokeshire. So the ICAs do in fact reflect the distribution of curlew that's currently seen. Just before I move on to the results for this year, I just thought it would be worth mentioning that the Welsh Government do recognise the need for more woodland creation in Wales, but they do also recognise the threat of that to breeding wader populations. So in 2026, the Welsh Government are funding a Wales breeding wader survey. This is a presence-absence survey that will be undertaken in a selection of kilometres squared throughout Wales based on their probability of holding curlew. So it's going to be focused on curlew, but will record all other breeding waders. So the estimate we have, as I said, is 400 to 500 breeding pairs. But following the 2026 survey, we should have much better information. So if we just touch on, so I would just like to say that today we had our face-to-face annual catch-up on the breeding season, our curlew practitioners meeting. So the numbers I have here are slightly provisional because these are from last week and people were giving me slightly different numbers today. So our initial findings for the whole of Wales for 2025 is that we had 244 probable breeding pairs. We know 176 chicks fledged, and the number of fledged young, well, we have a range from 32 to 50. The 32 is where, birds were seen flying, and we're very confident that those birds is a minimum. There are other sites where the parents were seen alarming later, much later in the season, so they're possibly fledged. And just to compare that with the year before, so in 2024, we had 256 probable breeding pairs with 53 to 81 from within the ICAs, and having analysed all the data for Wales by the end of 2024, we had 283. So I'd just like to say that the 244 for this year, I think, is more reflection of monitoring effort and a need to finalise the data than an actual decrease in the population. But that we can clarify, hopefully, following the 2026 survey period. So thank you, and I'll catch up with you again next year, hopefully.
Thank you very much indeed, Bethan. And we move just a little bit east now and into the first of the Shropshire talks from Caleb Stradling.
Here from South Shropshire, and we do monitor a little bit into Wales, but so some of those territories we'll be reporting are from Wales, but all of the nests are on the English side this year. So yeah, this is Black 99 is one of the two new head-started bird recruits this year. Another female was about 3 miles away from the rearing site, and this guy about half a mile away. So we did the territory assessments as part of the Curlew Solutions trial that Harry and others have spoken about, and we found more territories than we have found any other year. So 54 territories. Most of those possible peripheral ones are backed up by colouring sightings as well. So we think that is a fairly good assessment of the population. And Mandy was very happy to see that many territories around. So that's more than we've had before. And then onto the nest monitoring. So we monitored 18 nests, wild nests this year. So we did head start, so we did 17 head started nests and 18 monitored nests for the Curlew Solutions trial, 35 nests in total. Yeah, we fenced 13 nests and they all hatched, which is brilliant. One that we found too late, so we just decided to leave it unfenced. It was in a hay meadow, and it was like mid-June, so we thought there's no chance that they're not going to hatch imminently, so we just left them to it, and they did hatch. And the predated ones and the abandoned ones were all partial clutches, so kind of less of a big loss, really. So this is where they all were in the habitat. So we only had one silage nest in the sample, and that's only actually because there were 3 more that we found, but they were all abandoned, so we kind of had no choice but to head start those eggs in that situation. Otherwise we would have kept a few more, but we did manage to hatch one nest in the silage field. And this is the success of the fenced nests, 100%, woohoo. And yeah, sort of a mixed bag of other outcomes in the 5 that we left unfenced. But as I say, they're all partial clutches apart from the one that hatched. So yeah, chick monitoring, we monitored the 14 broods from our monitored nests, and you can see where they all got to here. 3 broods fledged chicks, which is amazing for us. We have to take the rough with the smooth at Curlew country, so any amount of success is brilliant, and we celebrate it all. We also found 4 more broods from unmonitored nests and 1 chick that had already fledged, so I went to try and catch it to ring it, and it flew off, but I was happy to see it go either way. So yeah, 5 chicks confirmed to fledge from our bit of the hills. This is just like a fun little timeline of how they all got on. So some of these have nest predated, but they relayed quite quickly, and then yeah, even one that had the first nest predated went on to fledge 2 chicks. So that's great. And then this is just a comparison between the 2 groups. So we had started 17 nests. The birds did better at hatching eggs than we did slightly. So we have a quota of 50 eggs. We hatched 40, but 37 were released as chicks, which is a very good total and the best total we've ever had at Curlew country. And in the wild, obviously, as you might expect, the chick survival was not nearly so good. And so, yeah, with head starting, we are reaching our figure of keeping the population going, but without, we are fading into extinction. But so we're keeping it going. We've got our license for back this year and for another 3 years, and we will continue to monitor and try and split it up as best as we can to decide when it's safe to exit. Yeah, so there's just a few photos if there's time. I don't know what time we're on. There's head started chicks getting their rings on and then just being released out the door. This is 2 of the chicks that fledged from one brood. Stayed in a hay meadow, and then they kind of mooched around quite a lot. They were seen in a scrape that was a new scrape put in across the road that saw quite a lot of use by lots of curlews, adult, keeping an eye on things in the background there. So that was nice. And then this satellite tag bird, we put a new tag on in April, found the nest very easily once she'd settled down to lay, and engaged a new farmer who let us fence the nest. They hatched, and 3 weeks later, there was we ringed this chick. Meanwhile, the female had already gone off on her migration to Western Island, but the male was still behind with the chick. And then 2.5 weeks later, that's an old one where when we captured them for metal ringing, and then a week before they fledged. So these 2 did fledge. I saw them fly myself, and it was a joyous occasion. So yeah, that's about it from us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your joy, Caleb. And on to Leo Smith, who's in North Shropshire. Do you think you could just play the slides, and we'll just see what you had to say on screen, and we'll just have to take your slides as your words? Just give us a couple of seconds to get the gist of the slide. And on to the next slide, please. Good, some results. I like results. The no-fledged young. That is very sad. This must be very depressing, and Mary talks about the loss of how depressing it is for the volunteers as well. Yeah, that's heading for extinction. Yeah. Pesky pheasants. I think this is very powerful. Thank you. I'm sorry we didn't hear you, but your message still came across very strongly, Leo. So I think we all understand the pheasant issue. We'll try and get those references into the report of the evening. Thank you, Leo. Sorry about that. And we move a little bit further north to Barny Sykes in the Lake District.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're fine.
Good. It's Barny Sykes. We're Curlew Recovery South Lakes. We're up in Cumbria, in the lowlands of Cumbria. So we're a group of very local volunteers. We're not connected with a conservation organisation. We're working closely on private land, working very closely with the farmers. It's meadows, it's pastures, it's lowland and rolling hills, some intensive, some less so. Last year we had a record year. This year we did a lot better. So we're pleased with our results for the last 2 years, and I'll go through that in a little more detail. So we found 32 pairs this year, 40% up on last year. That's not because the curlews are increasing, that's just because our scope and our finding abilities are improving. There's an awful lot of volunteers involved, awful lot of hours, and that's increasing also. About 70% of the nests that we find last year and this year hatch. We fence on fine, so we fence every nest that we find. We do a lot of family liaison, and we're doing predator control, crow control in the vicinity of every nest. Fox control is done by the farmers, but we're liaising closely with the fox control guys. Total chicks this year, we had 78 chicks, 37% up on previous year. So that's been increasing as we're getting better and as we're getting better relationships with the farmers and more volunteers. The percentage of chicks that fledge is up around the 30. So a third of the hatched chicks seem to fledge last year and this year. Whether it'll be the same next year, I don't know, but that seems to be what's happening. There's a lot of monitoring going on. As I say, we're doing predator control in the vicinity of every nest, a lot of farmer liaison. We had a drone this year. We've been rescuing chicks in front of mowers and things, so that sort of helped a little bit of our fledging success. So this year we had 27 chicks fledged. We're monitoring most broods on most days from afar. We're not tagging chicks like others are. We're monitoring from afar with adult behaviour and catching sights of chicks later on. It's a massive volunteer effort, and the fledged chicks were 50% up this year versus the previous year. So we're around about the 0.84, I think it was, level of chicks per pair. I'm not going to go into the drone slide in a lot of detail. We got a drone this year for the first time. I'm happy to talk to people about the highs and lows of that. It is very helpful. but it's not a replacement for field work. You still need to know where you're looking and things. So we're still learning. We found nests with it. We found chicks with it. It's very, very useful, but it's not a replacement for lots and lots of volunteer hours out there with telescopes and binoculars. These guys, I don't know how well you can see the video on your screens, but these two chicks were rescued from in front of a mowing machine, and off they go, released off into the wild to fledge. They were 2 or 3 days off fledging, these guys. We do crow control in the vicinity of every nest. It's a huge amount of effort. We're going round and round managing crow traps. A increase in crows in line with the increase in the nests found. So we're closely liaising with the fox control guys. There's a lot of engagement happening with the community. So we're in the parish mag every month through the season. Susanna Bleakley is doing zillions of presentations to WIs and nature groups, and that, you know, she's doing school presentations, and lots of the kids in the school are, you know, the sons and daughters of farmers who have curlews on their land, and it's getting out there. So we're getting a lot of people, a lot of the farmers are ringing us up and saying, I think I might have got one in my land. Can you come and have a look? And that's going really well. So it's a lot of effort, you know, right the way through the season, right the way through the year. So more volunteers, more hours, more experience of following the chicks. We're fencing on find. The farmer engagement is improving. Our knowledge is improving of both the pairs and the land ownership. Targeted predator control. We've got good kit through FIPL, thermal drone, binoculars, telescopes, thermal scopes, all through FIPL, thank you. Lots of engagement and awareness, and the farmers have all been amazing. They're very good. Just to thank you, final slide, thank you to lots of people. It takes a village to raise a curlew. There's lots of people get involved. So thank you. That's it, Graham.
Well, thank you very much. I apologise, it was my writing. It says clearly Barney, but I just can't read it. So thank you for that. And finally, on to Jonathan Pinnick in Northern Ireland.
Hi there, everyone. Before I start, I just want to say how fantastic it's been to hear from everybody else as to how your seasons have all gone. Hopefully, I can send you away on a reasonably positive note. Great. Okay. Yeah. So I'm the RSPB Northern Ireland Conservation Officer for Loch Earn. But in my talk, I'm going to briefly cover the 3 sites where RSPB are working in Northern Ireland to benefit curlew, either on our own land or land where we work in partnership with other landowners. So for those of you who don't know, Loch Earn is right in the far southwest of Northern Ireland. It's made up of 2 lochs, Upper Loch Earn and Lower Loch Earn, which between the 2 constitute the 2nd largest freshwater body in Northern Ireland, 4th largest in Ireland. The first I'm going to talk about is the Lower Loch Earn Islands Reserve, which the RSPB manages. It's our most westerly reserve in the UK, and it was the RSPB's first reserve in Northern Ireland. They've been working here, I think, since the 1960s. It's made up of about 40 islands, around of which 11 or 12 are managed for breeding waders, including curlew. And that management includes a combination of grazing with cattle, a mixture of Highland cattle and continental breeds. It has benefited significantly in recent years from Curlew Life funding, which helped to fund scrub removal, full field predator fencing, and also wet feature creation. This year's curlew figures were excellent. There were 55 pairs of curlew based on the breeding wader surveys, which is a considerable increase from 2024 when there were 42 pairs. There were 12 nests located. Now that is significantly down from the previous year, but the reason for that was that the team were 2 members of staff short for most of the field season this year, which made nest finding a lot more challenging. They really had to focus on just getting the surveys done and didn't have as much time for nest finding. But so that figure is probably a significant underestimate. On the positive side, though, we know that a minimum of 17 chicks fledged, and again, that figure is probably, a significant underestimate, because the island nature of the reserve means that most of the survey work and monitoring work is conducted from boats. It makes it very difficult to identify individual broods, so they can really only go on sort of a best guess of the number of fledged young. I should say it has this, these islands represent probably the highest density of breeding waders overall anywhere on the island of Ireland. It's around 200 hectares that's being managed in total for waders, and looking at if you take in all the breeding wader species, there's about one breeding wader pair per hectare, so it really is a very high density population. Moving on, just a few photos here from the reserve this year. One is the one in the bottom left-hand corner is of a curlew, colouring curlew, which we believe is from Ireland. Still awaiting confirmation as to exactly where, but that just shows that you can actually read the colourings of a curlew using a trail camera. The photo at the top there in the middle is one of the scrapes that I mentioned that were created through Curlew Life, and you can see it's being well used. There's a couple of juvenile curlew there. And then the bottom right is a juvenile white-tailed eagle, which that just illustrates the wide range of predators that are found on the reserve, because that very same camera had a few days previously picked up a juvenile curlew. Yeah, quite interesting to see that. Moving on to the wider Lough Erne landscape, which is where I work, we work with landowners across an area of around about 1,000 hectares, and that's primarily wet lowland grassland and fen habitat. The curlew population is pretty small and quite scattered. So this year we estimated that we had 9 pairs based on the breeding wader surveys. 6 of those on the upper loch, where we monitor 15 sites, and then 3 on lower Lough Erne, where we have 3 sites that we work on that are off reserve. Of those 9 pairs, we were able to identify 3 territory areas, and 2 nests were located. One of those nests was on an island, so we didn't put a nest fence around that one because of, we had concerns about being able to access the nest on a regular basis to check the cameras, check the fencing, and also it was an island that had lapwing and oystercatcher also nesting in close proximity, and we thought that the risk of causing disturbance was too great. The other nest though was fenced, and that nest successfully successfully hatched three chicks. Now, unfortunately, those chicks didn't survive to fledging. They disappeared after a couple of weeks. We presume probably predated, but can't be sure. And the nest on the island was also predated, we think, by gulls, because we found the fragments of the eggshells left in the nest. The map here at the bottom left, that just shows the 3 territory areas that we identified. The picture in the top is of us putting up the nest protection fence, and then the bottom right is the nest that was successfully fenced and where the chicks hatched. And finally, Glenwerry. Now this is the other area where we work with landowners to protect curlew on their land. So it's been a real success. I'm sure you've heard about it through previous talks. It's around 7,000 hectares of upland, grassland and bog. This year, 45 pairs of curlew were found through the surveys, which was slightly down on previous years. But again, they had a very new team in place this year, so not as experienced on the site, so still a really good number to detect. 21 nests were located, of which 18 were fenced. The 3 that weren't fenced, that was because they were discovered very late on in the incubation period, so it was felt better just to leave them to hatch of their own accord. They were then able to follow 20 broods. The 18 fenced all hatched, and they also picked up a couple of later broods there. So between those 20 broods, 16 of them managed to fledge a total of 41 chicks, which translates to a fledging success rate of 0.91 chicks per pair, which is well above the golden 0.5%, 0.5 chicks per flet pair. So a really fantastic result, and that's, I think the third year in a row that they've managed to sort of exceed that 0.5%. So a really positive point to finish on. All three sites I'll also mention are going to continue to benefit from funding over the next few years, as RSPB Northern Ireland have just recently been awarded a major grant through Peace Plus funding, which is the sort of last big pot of EU funding for projects in Northern Ireland and also the border counties in the Republic. So lots to be positive about, really. I would just finish by mentioning that the three sites that we've talked about there probably represent about 80% of the curlew population in Northern Ireland. We are aware that there are a few other scattered curlew pairs in areas like the Sperrins, which is a range of hills sort of in Mid-Ulster and central Northern Ireland. And then there are also a few pairs near to the border with Monaghan in sort of East Fermanagh. And we are hoping to be able to put a bit of resource into working with some of those landowners in those areas as well, thanks to Peace Plus. So that is all from me. Thank you very much. And thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. We all need more Glenwerry. So well done on there. We've heard some really interesting stuff, and thank you very much to all the presenters who've done such an excellent work. I just want to say three things in conclusion. One is wonderful engagement and great partnership seems to deliver more curlews. So well done, everybody. The second is it's lovely to hear of successes, especially if you're in an area where you think success is impossible, because it is possible. Some of it requires money, some of it requires more engagement, and some of it just requires better habitat. But it can be done. So keep doing what you're doing, and perhaps a little bit more. And the other thing that strikes me is so many people are trying so many different things, and I think that's great, because the more things we try and the more the better. But let's just make sure we all keep talking, because the shared knowledge can make a huge difference, because after all, what we're all about is something called Curlew Action. So let's share those actions and increase the number of curlews. So thank you very much to everybody. I'm delighted to be able to do this. And as I say, I'm sorry I'm gone a little bit over. So thank you very much, everybody.